Alright, so who should start this one off?
Well, between you and me, you're the one who's got issues with Telltale. Me, I'm 100% on board with everything they do.
Jesus Christ, you fucking fanboy.
As a matter of fact, I'm trying to apply for an internship with them for the summer just as we speak. So, guys, I'm on your side.
Yeah, and I suppose you want to do some ad revenue sharing with them too, because, you know, the Nintendo precedents, so...
Well, I don't like them that much.
You're a rational fanboy then, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Alright, well, if you're a rational fanboy, then hopefully you'll hear me out here, because, full disclaimer, I like Telltale Games. This isn't one of those love-hate things that the internet loves to fucking blow out of proportion. I do like their games. I've played the majority of them, except for, like, Jurassic Park and CSI, or whatever the fuck that one was. Law and Order.
The Undesirables, yes.
Before they started getting into their, finding their footing and really making some kick-ass shit. I love their stuff. I love their storytelling. I mean, the Wolf Among Us was great. It was way better than I thought it would be, and Walking Dead series, fantastic. However, when I think of Telltale Games, that little thing that pops up whenever you start a game, it says, your decisions will have an effect on the outcome of this story. It rubs me the wrong way. And several reasons, and of course, I know Cinemax's first thing is going to be like, nothing you do makes any differences in the game I play. It's not necessarily just that. Well, it is mostly that though, but you got to hear me out first. First of all, for everyone who's listening, or second of all, for everyone who's listening, this may be a spoiler-intense after hours. So if you have not played The Walking Dead, both of them. If you have not played The Wolf Among Us, and if you have not played the first 2 episodes of the Game of Thrones Telltale game, first of all, what the fuck is wrong with you? Go out and play them. See, I like them too. I like Telltale too. Go out and play the fucking things. Turn this off. Come back, maybe.
If you want to. We're not saying you should, but...
Yeah, unless you have something better to do than listen to us prattle. Go out and play them, and then come back. But, it's going to be kind of a spoiler-intensive conversation just because of the topic or the subject matter.
Well, it has to be.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we won't be able to bring up any sort of examples to demonstrate our points.
Exactly. However, this is my issue with Telltale Games, and I gotta keep on rephrasing. I like them, but...
Mm-hmm. Let's hear your heresy, Judas.
I know. He's already got the Spanish Inquisition ready.
Well, no, actually, a bit of a foreshadowing. I do share some of LaughingMan's criticism of just busting his balls over here. I'm just getting fucking fresh, to paraphrase Goodfellas.
You should have heard him busting my balls earlier before when I even brought up talking about this subject. Well, everyone else was like, I'm like, I'm not saying that. Anyways, so the Telltale Games always say that, the decisions you make are going to reflect in later on the story. And as a Telltale gamer who enjoys their work for the great most part, I gotta be an apologist here. Jesus Christ, otherwise people are gonna be downvoting without even hearing me out. Like in the Steam conversations and some other YouTube conversations that have sparked the same question. The consequences of your actions seem to be so moot. Mm-hmm. In my opinion. I mean, it is great having those moments where you have to do a moral dilemma. Do you save this person or do you save this person? Well, shit, you only got 3 seconds. You gotta do something. Hurry up and pick. And boom, you have to kind of live with the consequences. However, the consequences, again, are so irrelevant. I've been playing the Game of Thrones game recently, and the last game I played was Wolf Among Us. And the Wolf Among Us, you can go through the entire game in several different ways and different shades of gray, of being an absolute asshole as a big bad wolf. You can be the big bad wolf, or you can be a
reformed big bad wolf.
Yeah, a reformed big bad wolf, nicer, more kind, gentler, that kind of thing. You can be kind of the nice guy. It's up to you entirely. So when you get towards the end of the Wolf Among Us, the things that you do with the other characters, the way you interact with them, actually does come back to bite you in the ass. Because you can either get all the other fairyland fantasy characters on your side, or they can see you as the big bad wolf when the antagonist of the game, the Crooked Man, starts to deconstruct your arguments and paint you as the villain and not him. And of course, the Crooked Man, if you don't know who the Crooked Man is, stop listening to this shit and play the fucking game. Anyways, this mob boss starts turning the tables on you, pointing fingers at you, that you're the threat, not him. And even if you play as the bastard, I played as a good guy. I watched a YouTube video where the other guy played as complete bastard. I got the the people on my side. The other guy, the YouTuber, has been made out to be a villain by the townspeople and by the Crooked Man. And you think that you're the one who's going to be thrown down the well.
Yes.
Now, all of a sudden, here comes the donkey girl who attests and backs up everything that you say, and you reach the exact same conclusion, good or not, you reach the exact same point in time where you get what I would call almost like a Mass Effect 3 type of dilemma. You play Mass Effect 1, 2, and 3, doing all these things, saving the galaxy or letting certain races die off or whatever it may happen to be, and it's all for naught. And at the very end, you're basically given the left, straight, or right choice on how you want to end the game, instead of having what you've done through the course of the game dictate exactly what happens. With the case of the Crooked Man, you get a chance to either send him to jail, which is what I did, so he became a little bird in a cage. You can either throw him down the well. Again, I don't have to explain this shit, because if you're listening to this and you need explaining, quit listening to this shit.
Yeah, it's the wishing well.
Yeah, so the wishing well. You can either throw him down it, or you can tear off his head and throw him down the wishing well. You basically come to this about the same climax, unless you decide to kill the Crooked Man before then. But again, you're still interrogated by the people, and it's all for naught. You still come to the exact same end point of the game, regardless which path you take.
As far as the final decision goes, yes. And to sort of begin my, I'm not even going to say a defense, but rather a justification of what Telltale is doing is...
Justifications which I can get on board, just so you know. I'm not the villain. I'm not... Cinemax isn't the Crooked Man, I'm not the wolf.
The thing is what Telltale is doing is, in a way, it's almost unique, because there's all sorts of arguments going on right now, even on the Telltale's official forums, which I quickly checked, and believe you me, there's plenty of threads discussing the same thing that we're kind of trying to argue right now, whether or not your decisions matter, whether or not it's even a game.
Yep. Steam also.
Yeah, so it's not like, Telltale is absolutely exempt from criticism and everyone's on board, and we, or rather I should say you, are the dissenting voice, the only dissenting voice here. So, but I do think that a lot of the criticism, a lot of the most vocal criticism, the most vehement criticism, comes from people who don't really realize what it is Telltale is attempting to do here. And I think what they're trying to do is they're trying to make interactive stories, because when you start this or that episode of this or that game, it says interactive story by so-and-so, and at least the writers.
Right.
Whereas a lot of people are basically kind of approaching it from a typical video game mentality of, like, you are the chosen one, you are the most important character in the entire story, which I don't really blame them, because looking at the history of video games, one could almost make the argument that gamers have been almost like spoiled, or at the very least conditioned to think that way, because think back to like the early NES days, where the stories were as complex as the president has been kidnapped by ninjas, are you a bad enough dude to save him? And truth be told, looking at the history of video games, that has sort of been a lot of the premises, if you think about it. Like, something happens,
you're the last hope,
and all of a sudden you coming into the story, be it a Call of Duty game, or even something like, let's take another game series that's popular.
Mario. You're the only one who could save the princess.
Yes, that's the obvious choice. Or if we even take more story-driven games, like say something like BioWare does, with Mass Effect and Dragon Age, in a lot of cases, whatever the situation might be, you're the chosen one. When you play as Commander Shepard, you don't play as like, let's take like the Star Trek Next Generation scenario. You're not playing as one of the members of the crew.
Ensign Shepard.
Yeah. You're playing as basically Captain Picard, and you're placed in these situations where everyone listens to what you have to say, and you're given all of these grandiose choices of whether or not to save this galaxy or let this race go extinct and whatnot. And whereas what Telltale is doing, it's basically taking all of these scenarios and thinking like, okay, you know what a good example would be in our third and final part or episode or installment of the SGW trilogy, or the #Messiah trilogy, we made the point that it's, in a lot of cases, video games are all about empowerment, And because of that, you would want to play as the Jaime Lannister-looking knight who gets to slay the dragon and save the princess, because you get to feel much better, because like, oh, look.
Yeah, I was actually going to bring that up. Yeah, the reason why you play is not Ensign, but you play as Picard is because that's the desirable point of view to play in a video game. You want to be empowered.
You want to feel like you have an effect in the story.
You're right.
But there was actually a comment from one of the viewers who said, well, the question we ask is like, why would you want to play as Bob the Stable Boy if he doesn't go on a grandiose adventure, etc.? And one of the responses from the viewers was, well, unless Bob the Stable Boy has an interesting story of his own to tell, which is kind of what Telltale is doing, because if you look at their video games, you know, The Walking Dead, The Wolf Among Us, Game of Thrones, you're never placed in a position of definitive power. Mm-hmm. Like The Walking Dead, the setting is, it's the zombie apocalypse, you're one of the survivors, whereas you take a game like Resident Evil, which deals kind of with like the same kind of themes, the same premise, etc., but you're always placed in a position of like, you're either Jill Valentine or Leon S. Kennedy, who's either like a cop.
You're the one getting to the heart of the outbreak, and you're the one who can stop the outbreak or contain it, while Walking Dead, you just have to deal with it.
Yeah, precisely. Like, though, if in Resident Evil you get to play as one of the members of this special unit, and you get to the bottom of this mystery, you uncover that, aha, it's the nefarious Umbrella Corporation that's behind all of it, and of course, at the end, when the United States government decides to nuke the city, you're the one who gets out of the city safely. Whereas in The Walking Dead, you would be basically playing as one of the unfortunate undesirables who's still stuck in the city trying to survive. And if you think about it, by the end of Resident Evil, you would still get nuked because you didn't make it out of town. Like, Telltale is not going for this kind of, like, empowerment thing, where you're the most important character in the story and you get to decide who lives or who dies, because same thing with The Wolf Among Us. You get to play as Bigby Wolf, the sheriff of Fabletown, and while you have a certain amount of authority, by the end of the story you don't become the mayor of Fabletown. A lot of the moral decisions, or the moral choices that Telltale forces you to make, comes from the fact that, like, a lot of the hardships that happen in The Wolf Among Us that befall some of the characters, they're not directly your fault. They're the fault of the incompetent administration of Fabletown. But of course,
and an exploitative mob, basically.
Yes, exactly, and the Crooked Man's invisible influence over the city. But because you're sort of in a position of power as the sheriff, a lot of people are looking up to you and basically trying to pin the blame on you, even though technically both as Bigby, the character, and the player, there's very little you can do. So sometimes, because of that, some of the decisions you make basically are kind of like you trying to make amends. Like, for example, the Butcher and the Witch. The reason why they end up working for the Crooked Man was because the administration didn't care about their plight. So, at that time, when you interact with them, you're given the choice of either basically kind of towing the party line and not giving a crap about them, or you could try and make a difference by trying to abolish the black market and giving them a job, by treating them as fellow human beings or fellow fables, whatever. And because of that, at the end, during the trial, when the Crooked Man tries to say, he goes to the witch and he tries to say, like, and what did they do to your tree? Did they treat you fairly? And because I was fair and I did not burn the tree against...
Or tree down.
Yeah, she says, actually, no, they treated me like a decent human being.
Well, Bigby did, but not Snow White. Snow White was trying to get Bigby to burn down her tree, so...
Well, that's true, but that's what I'm saying, is that you're kind of placed in a situation where you're either given the choice to make amends or toe the party line.
Right.
I did not follow Snow White's instructions because I saw that this is kind of the problem right here. Mm-hmm. Just because she broke the law, you're not looking at the circumstances under which she was forced to work for the Crooked Man. You're just like, this is against the law, fucking burn the tree down. And I was like...
You didn't look at it in a black and white, Judge Dredd kind of way.
Yeah, I made more of a libertarian decision, if you will. Same thing to kind of wrap up my
I don't think giving somebody a government job is a libertarian decision.
I mean, as far as abolishing the black market, I'm not looking at it from a puritanical standpoint, where it's like, no, drugs are illegal, you should throw this guy for 25 years just because he smoked a butt of marijuana.
Yeah, just like Bush and Obama both did.
But oh no, we're getting too political here.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, I know. But the third and final game I'm going to use as an example is Game of Thrones. And I'm going to let you make your point about the episode 1, or the ending of episode 1, in a second here. But if you think about it, Game of Thrones is kind of like, as far as protagonists dying, it's pretty much expected. Mm-hmm. I mean, season 1 ends with Ned Stark dying, despite the fact that he basically did bend the knee before Joffrey, but because a similar situation happens in Game of Thrones, and in Game of Thrones you even have less power. The characters you play as, you even have less power than the Starks did, because the Starks were basically, I forget the official title, but they were the rulers of the North.
Yeah, they were the Wardens of the North.
Yeah, whereas in this case, you're playing as one of the smaller houses who was on the Stark side during the War of the Five Kings.
Right, or a handmaiden or something along those lines.
Yeah, but because your allegiances were to the Stark family back in the war, and your side loses in the war, now everyone is constantly either trying to question your loyalty or motives, or is even outright trying to basically decimate what's left of your family. So you, by default, you already have a limited amount of control you're going to have over the events. Like, if Ramsay Snow wants to fuck you over, he's going to fuck you over, regardless of whether or not you're being wise and whatnot. So, again, no one really made... I guess there might have been some people complaining about the death of Ned Stark the same way there were people complaining about the death of Robb Stark during the Red Wedding. But again, that's the story what's his name? J.R.R. Martin?
R. Martin, yeah.
But again, that's the story
George R. Martin.
George R.
Jack Snow, what?
The same kind of jokes we made last time. Anyways, but that's the story the author decided to tell. And the same thing with Telltale. But because people are kind of used of being in control of their own destiny, or even other people's destiny in video games, they're throwing a hissy fit because, well, regardless of what you do, you still die at the end of episode 1.
See?
I almost sound like Jerry Seinfeld there for some reason.
What's up with that?
Mm-hmm. You die at the end of episode 1 in Telltale. This is supposed to be a game. It's supposed to be interactive. What's the deal with that?
Well, here's my issues. And first of all, I have no problem with the main protagonist dying at the... Well, not the main protagonist, but a protagonist dying at the end of Game of Thrones episode 1.
Uh-huh.
My issue is more about the fact that it's almost like... It's like the storytelling in the games is almost like complete nihilism. Doesn't matter what you do, all points eventually lead to the same conclusion.
Yes, I actually agree with that.
All right. Let's say that you are in front of Cersei Lannister, or you are even in front of the witch in the
Wolf Among Us.
Wolf Among Us, and you're faced with burning down a tree or lying to Cersei, etc. You're presented a ton of options. As far as like what you can say in front of them. You can be defiant, you can be rude, you can be, kind, or you can be subservient. And you get these little things to say, Cersei Lannister noticed this, or the witch noticed that, or Snow White noticed this, and etc., etc. There's little messages that say that something might be happening behind the scenes. However, almost all points always equal to the same outcome. I mean, granted, you can choose not to burn the tree down, and that will affect the witch's opinion of you later on in the game. However, because I've seen, like I said, people do the different playthroughs of Wolf Among Us, and one of them did burn down the tree, but still got the option to turn the crooked man to a crow. So again, it's like in theoretical physics, everything you do, there's a complete opposite of you doing it, and basically the timeline keeps breaking off into separate universes. Every single time every millisecond, the universe divides itself by 2, and there's the option where you did something, and there's another option where you didn't do something. It keeps on forking out ad infinitum.
Unless you're Owlman.
Yeah, unless you're Owlman, then nothing matters. Again, it goes back to the nihilism.
Yes.
That's a Justice League, what was the name of the movie joke?
The Crisis of Two Earths.
Yeah, Crisis of Two Earths joke. Anyways. So again, when you make a choice between one thing or another, the outcome, the general outcome, and again, it kind of goes back to what Cinemax was saying as far as like, you're not really into a position of power for the entire world. You don't make these gigantic earth-shattering changes, at least not through your decision making. But it's like nothing you do seems to have any major repercussions. You're going along, and you make a choice, and you have these two separate universes form where you made the choice here, or you made a choice for something else, and those two choices are still skipping along hand in hand down the path.
Okay.
Where they don't really diverge into something much larger. If you piss off Cersei, let's not even go Game of Thrones because I haven't seen what happens in 3 and 6 and the rest of those yet, though. But let's go back to Walking Dead, the very first season, where you get a choice in the very beginning to either save Duck, the Kinney's kid, in the farm, or you get a chance to save the cop. And no matter which one you do, the cop still dies and Kenny still lives, or Duck, Kenny's son, still lives. However, the only repercussion from that there on out is that Kenny gets a little bit of a distaste for you, but you can still kind of smoothen it over later on. I mean, it's not like you save the cop and Duck dies, Kenny goes on his way, and you stay at the farm with the cop and his dad.
Right. I'm actually glad that you segued into this point, because we kind of have to address one thing, and that is, or rather, I want to address one thing, and that is the fact that sometimes it's no secret that Telltale has they've kind of risen to prominence via doing these video game spin-offs of popular franchises like The Walking Dead or the Fables comic, the Game of Thrones, etc., etc.
Borderlands.
Yes, that too. But of course the problem here is that because they're working within a larger, already established universe, there are certain compromises they have to do. For example, when you brought up the incident at the farm, and that is truly the first moral decision you get to make in the game. Mm-hmm. The problem is you're not just at some random farm, and it's just some random kid. Well, Duck is a random kid, basically, but the cop, he's not just a random person. He's actually the son of the owner of the farm, and the owner of the farm happens to be Herschel Green, who is a major character in both the Walking Dead TV show and the comic book adaptation, the original comics. Not the adaptation, but the original comic book. And by the time the group from both the TV show and the comic ends up at Herschel's farm, he already mentions that his son died earlier, so Telltale was kind of being like a prequel in this case. Mm-hmm. And by the time the group from the TV show ends up at the farm, both Lee and Clementine are nowhere to be seen. So, because there's already continuity that Telltale kind of needs to navigate through, there was no way that, you know, you would have been able to stay on the farm for the remaining 5 episodes.
Right.
Obviously, the repercussion of not saving Doug here is the fact that Kenny is going to mistrust you, and that is indeed something that would happen in real life if you were given the option of, like, you know, a child was in danger, and you had a chance to save a child or a grown man who's a cop who has a fucking gun.
Yeah.
And if you don't save the child, obviously the parents are going to take umbrage with that. They might mistrust you. Especially later down the line when you reveal to them that, oh, by the way, I'm also a felon on the run, basically. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the decisions, and this is something that, again, some people have noticed this, other people have taken offense with that, but a lot of the decisions that you make and the stuff you say, it has more of an impact on the way your relationships are with other characters. So, like, what needs to happen will happen as far as the story goes, but the way other characters will react to you is going to be different, because, for example, to go with The Walking Dead, in season 1, if you've been by Kenny's side for the majority of the game, when it comes to basically risking the entire group's life to save Clementine, he's either going to step in, or rather he's either going to rise to the challenge and go with you, or he's going to bring up the fact, yeah, you know what, you've never had my back, so no offense.
Why should I do it now?
Yeah. So, and the same thing with season 2 of The Walking Dead, because if Lee and Kenny had a good relationship, at one point Kenny is going to reference the fact that Lee was one hell of a guy, meaning that he was a great human being.
Right. Whereas if you didn't, he'll say that, you know, Lee and him had conflicts, but still, you know.
Yeah, he'd be sympathetic, but it's like, sorry for your loss, but you know, it's not going to be the same relationship based on the between those two characters, based on how you play the game. Mm-hmm. Same thing with Lee and Clementine. For example, you could be a total abusive, I'm not sure if you can be an abusive jerk, but you can be kind of like negligent towards her throughout the story. And even though that does not necessarily change the ending of episode 5 of season 1, in season 2, if you were nice towards Clementine, then there's numerous moments when she will be able to, in dialogue options and whatnot, bring up the fact that Lee was basically a saint towards her. Whereas if he wasn't, then it's going to be like, well, he was just a guy who looked over me for a while, but he didn't really make that much of an impact on the story, so to speak,
right.
Or in her life at least. So, a lot of the decisions have more to do with the way other characters are treating you. Same thing with Game of Thrones, I suppose. Like, it's not gonna change the fact that, like, obviously Ramsay Snow is not gonna like you if you decide to bend the knee and whatnot, because at a certain point there comes a crucial moment when you almost kind of have to show defiance towards Ramsay Snow, and that's kind of the reason why the episode 1 ends the way it ends, more so than whether or not you decided to use
diplomacy
as opposed to choosing the war veteran and being more hostile and whatnot, obviously.
Right. And that's kind of what my contention is. I understand that the development of these completely different scenarios would be a pain in the ass.
Oh, trust me, it would be.
Like if you could actually, if say like The Walking Dead had no tie, the Farmhouse had no tie to the TV show and the comic book, and there was an alternate path you could take where you stay at the farm for a bit. Even if you do kind of swing wide and then rejoin at a certain point later on, it'd be a kind of a development and a storytelling nightmare. I do understand and I totally respect that. I also respect the fact that as far as like the little changes, the little dialogue changes here and there and the options that you have, compared to other video games, it is much better than like the classic point-and-click games like Sam & Max and the rest of those, where
yes,
it's extremely linear and you're just along for the ride versus putting in your 2 bits here and there. However, I still think that you're still along for the ride because all points eventually converge in the same place, and then at that very end point, you get a choice between 1, 2, or 3 options.
The good, the bad, and the ugly.
Right, exactly. Like I'm gonna spoil a little bit of The Walking Dead season 2, where at the very end you get a choice to either go with the woman, or go with Ken, or go alone with a baby.
That is actually a good example to both illustrate your point, but also my point, because I was about to, once you were done with the point you were trying to make, I was gonna butt in and say like, yeah, you know what? It is kind of like as you said, you're along there for the ride, which I would have a problem with if the ride was poorly written. But in this case, at least for me personally, this could be the case for other people, but I'm just speaking for myself here. To me, it's more the journey than the destination. So I don't take as much umbrage with the fact that you have limited control over the ending, because as you mentioned, or rather, as far as the decisions go, the thing I'll say in defense of Telltale is that the decisions or the differences might be minute and mostly have to do with the way you interact with other characters, which would be a bit of a letdown if those characters were not well written.
Right.
Because before I complete this point, you might want to share with the listeners the story from the first Dragon Age game, where you're able to let a certain serial killer, a fucking psychopath,
yes,
join your group, and even though that might have had some kind of effect on the story the same way it would in Telltale, it's never really brought up later on.
Yeah, there's, in Dragon's Age, the first one, there's a character that you come across, and he's in a cage. His name is Stan, and apparently he's been encaged or imprisoned for killing an entire family, and that like includes like the dog and the children.
Yikes.
And you walk up to this character and you're like, so you want to be in our party? And he's like, oh sure. And you bring him along. It's like fucking bringing Charles Manson into your fucking party in Final Fantasy. It's like, no, you don't hang around these type of people if they freely admit that they killed this family. What'd you do? I killed a family. Oh yeah, well, why don't you come with me? I'll spring you. It's like, fucking A. I mean, go down to a state prison and see if you can get away with that shit,
Wouldn't the family, or the surviving members, if there are any, object to that, by the way?
Yeah, you'd think.
Yeah, but that actually illustrates a point that, that's the problem, is, you may have, more liberty as far as, in a Bioware game, like Mass Effect or whatever, in deciding who joins your party, but the problem is that the writing is so shallow, because they only need to provide you with an excuse. It's what I said, it all harkens back to the early days of gaming, the early Final Fantasy game. If you choose to accept this character, you're accepting him into your party. This doesn't mean that you're going to have any kind of meaningful interactions with him. I'm not sure if there are any. I haven't played the game, so I'm not sure if there are any lines of dialogue where you get to talk with him and you get to see perhaps there are.
There are. Dragon's Age has tons of dialogue choices. You can even fuck the guy if you wanted to. So, I think never got that far, but
yuck. But if that's really an option, that's almost like the problem, in that the characters are kind of interchangeable. They're party members. And sure, you can be nice to one guy or another guy, and at the end, chances are you can fuck 70% of your party and whatnot. But
in my case, Max, you'd want to be nice to this girl or this girl. So, but whatever floats your boat, man. So
I didn't even play the game, so... You know.
I'm just busting your balls.
I don't know who that Dragon Age character is. I never played him. I never knew him. Anyways, but the point is that, like, with Telltale, as a contrast, for example, let's talk about romance. For example, in Mass Effect, there's numerous characters that you can romance, and it's almost like a hentai dating sim in a way.
It is. It so is.
But it really is, because it all boils down to you choosing the right dialogue options and maybe presenting the character with the right item or whatever, and next thing you know, there's your PG-13 sex scene as a reward. But that's pretty much it. That's all it boils down to.
Oh my god, Fox News saw a butt cheek. Ah.
Yeah, well, yes, that too. But what I'm trying to say here is that because of that, there's very little meaning behind the kind of interactions you have with other characters. Whereas in Telltale, in the season 1 of Telltale's The Walking Dead, for example, if you choose to save Carly, in episodes 2 and 3, it's kind of hinted, or at least you can make certain dialogue options where it's kind of hinted that maybe there's a beginning of a potential romance going on. Mm-hmm. It never goes beyond that, but if you...
Obviously,
but that's also what I'm trying to say, because it never goes beyond that, and if you were nice to her and maybe you liked her, because of that, the plot twist, or at least what happens in episode 3, has a lot more depth, as opposed to like, oh yeah, oh no, one member of my fighting party was killed, and well, I already fucked her, so whatever.
Yeah, well, you have more emotional depth though, but still, what happens. Again, no matter what you do in the game, no matter what kind of relationships you build, what's going to happen is going to happen anyway. It's a total nihilism simulator.
Which is why I like it personally, because an example you brought up is like the person who commits the questionable act in question. I believe her name is Lily. And she was the daughter of Larry, that old fart that I couldn't stand.
Yeah.
He's a total douchebag, or he was a total douchebag. Oh boy, I couldn't side with Kenny fast enough when it came to the choice in episode 2.
To smash his head in? Me too.
Like I said, I couldn't press that button fast enough. Oh, there's nothing you can do to save him, but he's still breathing.
What was that, Kenny? I didn't hear anything over the brain splattering.
Yeah, pretty much. But anyways, what you brought up is the fact that whether or not you choose, I don't know why you would choose to keep her in your party after what she does, but if you choose to abandon her, then you abandon her and she has to fend for herself. Whereas if you decide to let her stay for whatever reason, I don't know, you're suicidal perhaps,
she still takes your trailer and runs.
Right, which I would have a problem with if that didn't make sense, if it was like illogical, but it actually makes sense, because think about it. You're a member of this group, you just killed one of your own, everyone else despises you, for whatever reason the lead decided to let you in, but she's probably sitting there thinking that I'm so fucking dead the moment this car stops. Mm-hmm. Like, they're never gonna forget this.
Oh god, no.
So what she does, and given the fact that she's kind of like, throughout the episodes it's displayed that she's more about, she kind of locks herself in her room. She's more of an isolationist. She doesn't really trust anyone. It kind of, what she does makes sense from a writing standpoint, more so than letting fucking Charles Manson join your party in Dragon's Age. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I understand that. The character motivations in Telltale Games is phenomenal. Even the most despicable people, you understand why they're doing what they do. Game of Thrones episode 1, for instance, where Ramsay Snow sticks a knife through your throat. You understand why Ramsay Snow did that from a psychopathic point of view. Mm-hmm. He was testing the loyalty of your house, and that's why he was threatening to take away your sister, because you already have one guy in your command who killed other people who was under his command or his dad's command when their family was threatened. So he threatens your family to see what you do, and of course no action you take can... you can either pull her away or tell him no, or, stare him down or whatever. Uh-huh. Nothing you do avoids the fact that you fail his test and he sticks a knife through your throat.
Right. Also, because...
So again, it's just to get this out there, it's... When I play a Telltale game, it's like going on a long car vacation in a 2-lane highway. Or a 4-lane if you want to count the opposite traffic. Mm-hmm. You got your lane, you got another lane, and you're enjoying the view, you're enjoying yourself, enjoying the drive... And you think, okay, well, maybe I'll go into this other lane over here, and maybe I'll run over a skunk in this lane, whereas the lane to the right won't have the skunk. And yet you still hit the skunk, you drive over it, and you keep on driving.
With some decisions, yes. I will say that I think that at this point we've...
Except the one version where you actually hit the skunk, it leaves a little bit of a nasty smell for a temporary amount of time, but...
True, yeah.
That's my horrible analogy, I know.
I think that at this point we've pretty much established that Telltale puts story above everything else.
Which is fine. I mean, that's part of their name, Telltale Games.
Yes, and I would have a problem with that had the stories were bad, but they're so well written that you can't really complain.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, believe me, the end of Walking Dead, I was like, I mean, my reaction was no different than some of the other major Let's Players out there where they're practically crying on camera. I'm like, no way, no way.
Yeah.
And then the shock I got after playing Game of Thrones last night, when Ramsay Snow stabs you in the throat, that... It's a big spoiler, but we've already warned people not to listen if they don't want spoilers.
Yeah, let's just say it has much more, because you get to know these characters, their motivations, it has much more...
Oh, absolutely.
It has much more impact than, say, playing something like Skyrim, where you're
or
given...
even playing older games like Final Fantasy VII where Aerith dies. It's like, it really wasn't all that... I didn't really know her all that much, so...
Yeah, but the point I'm trying to make here is that on the other side of the spectrum, you have games like, say, as far as like fantasy goes, you have like Skyrim, right? Where it's a fantasy setting and you can do whatever the fuck you want. You can interact with characters, accept these side missions and whatnot, but the characters themselves that you interact with, for the most part, they're really kind of shallow.
Right, NPCs, classic.
Yeah, and you can like literally ride up to the king's, like walk up to the king's throne and stab him in the throat, which you can't do in Game of Thrones. You can't go to the King's Landing and kill Joffrey because that's not what the story dictates.
Right.
But again, the problem is in Skyrim
you see that big Metal Gear Solid 3 thing that says Paradox.
Yeah, exactly. But again, in Skyrim, because you're able to kill the king and you're able to teabag his corpse and you can do whatever the fuck you want. But as far as like getting to know the characters and as far as like getting some kind of emotional fulfillment out of the story, there's barely any. Same thing with like DayZ. DayZ is a mod of an older game. I forget what it was. It's a first-person shooter, and the game is like a zombie survival simulator. It's a multiplayer game where basically you're dropped in this world, this zombie-infested world, and you get to collect resources, guns, etc. You can make alliances with other players, right? But there's no overarching story. You're basically just there to see how long you can manage to survive in this world, and you interact with other players, but it's like, give me this item that I need, or give me some med packs, or maybe someone's like trying to rob you and you're trying to talk him out of killing you, but that's pretty much it. There's not much story going on. Whereas Telltale is the complete opposite, and
I would say complete opposite, because the gameplay is limited to essentially QuickTime events and the dialogue choice boxes from like Mass Effect,
and some exploration.
Yeah, but again, I wouldn't call it necessarily point and click, because it's pretty obvious to how to get the train started in episode 3 of The Walking Dead. So
true, but having that said, now that we've established the kind of mindset that Telltale is working in, I do think there is still some room for improvement, because like I said, it's incredibly hard because if you were able to make like decisions that
have a huge effect,
and like from episode 1 of episode 1 of The Walking Dead, season 1 of Walking Dead,
you never leave the farm.
You never leave the farm, etc. But you basically have to write 3 games from the get-go.
Yeah,
3 different possibilities where that maybe they converge sometime later on.
Right.
So that's kind of the problem. Another problem, of course, is the fact that so far Telltale has been working within established continuities.
Yes.
So there's a limited amount of things you can do. Like even in Game of Thrones, like I said, there's no option that lets you be the one who poisons Joffrey, for example, or kill him before the purple wedding happens, right?
Right.
And I think there could be some solutions, though. Oh, and of course, same thing with The Wolf Among Us, the ending. Like, you brought up the fact that if you play as a total bastard and a total bad guy, you don't get expelled from Fabletown for your own crimes, and the reason for that is because The Wolf Among Us acts as a prequel to the Fables comic series, and in issue number 1 of the Fables comic, Bigby Wolf is still the sheriff of Fabletown. So, needless to say, like you said, in MGS3, paradox, that's not the way it happened.
Yep.
However, one thing I will commend Telltale on, and this is a bit of a tangent, but still, having read the Fables comic, The Wolf Among Us, it's a beautiful prequel, because it explores so much of the stuff that the comic didn't talk about. Like in issue 30 or something, there's one line about like Ichabod Crane being the previous deputy mayor before Snow White and how things were shitty and corrupt, and they took that one line and they built such a beautiful story around it, because
the entire world behind it leads up to,
because save for Bigby Wolf, Snow White, Bluebeard, Flycatcher, and one or two characters, the rest are entirely new fables that never make an appearance in the comic book, like Georgie Porgy, Vivian, Donkey Skin Girl. All of that is Telltale doing it. So despite the fact that they had a limited control over the universe, they were able to make such a prequel/adaptation, which is something that video games have always struggled with, because, you know, there have been barely any good movie tie-in adaptations before this.
Terminator Salvation for PS3. I'm joking. That was a shit game, but you could get a shit ton of gold trophies, apparently, from what I've heard.
Yeah. One thing I think that Telltale, just to wrap up my point, this is not to say, of course, that Telltale is exempt from criticism, and I do think that one thing they could do, even if they have to work within a larger established continuity, one thing they could do is they could introduce a concept of bad endings. Because, like I said, regardless of which style of game you play as, right? Whether you're playing as Bigby Wolf and you try to actually be a reformed Big Bad Wolf, or if you're just being a nasty bastard towards everyone, you're still kind of strung along until the end, and the story is going to happen the way it happens. And one alternative that you and I talked about before this is introducing a concept of bad endings, kind of like survival horror used to do back in the day with Silent Hill and whatnot.
Right, and I want to get to that in a second. Right now, I just want to kind of explain my position too. And you said that, you know, you agree there's room for improvement, and it's my belief that if you really like something, or you really want to believe in something, or you really like something, those are the things
you should defend it to the death on the internet.
Oh God, no, absolutely not. You should do absolutely the opposite. The things that you like and the things that you care about are things that you should scrutinize the most. I mean, these are things that you care enough that you want to see them improve, you know. And that's why I think about Telltale Games. Is I am a fan of them. I enjoy the shit out of them, even though they are interactive stories versus what I would consider a game. My criticism is just I wish they would just swing out a little bit wider. You know, like your choice has just a little bit more of a consequence to what you're doing. I'm not saying that you need to develop the 3 game story arcs, you know, but just something else that has a little bit more of a
variety.
And well, not variety, just has a little bit more of a consequence versus, say, like Wolf Among Us. You can either choose to save the prince who was with, I think, Donkey Girl.
Yeah, Donkey Skin Girl.
Yeah, Donkey Skin Girl. You can either choose to save the prince by going to his house first, and he just shows up at the very end as one of the characters who just says like 3 lines. Or you can go to his house after Mr. Toad's and he'll be dead. So you still arrive, again, to the same conclusion. You're kind of going, you know, pick a lane on the highway, going to the same destination. And the only difference is very, very minute. Until the very end, where you get to make a Mass Effect 3 type of choice. You know, you want good, bad, or somewhere in between. Where, again, you and I kind of talked about there should be a concept of bad endings based on what you do during the course of the game. And if they conflict with the main storyline, well, you know, maybe the point of the bad ending is you play the game again to fit into the sequels or the main storyline of the established property.
Yeah, because I do think that the story Telltale has written so far, the 3 or 4 games I've played, they've been beautiful, but I do think that Telltale could benefit from growing some balls and like introducing a concept of a bad ending that would force the player to replay the game and basically not necessarily toe the party line, but if like one of the major themes of The Wolf Among Us is that you're trying to reform and make changes, then maybe you should at least put some effort into trying to reason with the other characters and see their point of view and try to change the current corrupt administration of Fabletown, or even like the first season of The Walking Dead. You're basically not necessarily forced, but you're put in a position where you have to look after this innocent girl who otherwise would have died by herself. So maybe you should put some effort into trying to protect her versus being a bastard, because one alternative, just to explain what we mean by bad endings, by the way, here's an example. Say you're playing season 1 of The Walking Dead, right? And say you're being a total I wouldn't say bastard, I wouldn't say you're abusing Clementine, but you're kind of like neglecting her. Like you don't give her a share of the food in the beginning of episode 2, for example. If she does something bad, you basically lash out on her, etc., etc. So by the time we get to episode 5 of the game, and she is with the stranger, say if you were a total bastard, because of this, she does not come to your aid, or she decides to stick with the stranger and whatnot, and because of that, you get the bad ending. And it's kind of made clear that it's the bad ending, like, and you got to play the game all over again.
Right. And people might think, my initial reaction to this was that it might be a pain in the ass. You know, you get done playing a game and you're like, I got the bad ending, I got to replay this thing, fuck that, I'll watch a Let's Play. But, you know, it's been done in the past. Silent Hill games have always done these good ending, bad ending things based on what you do. Silent Hill 2, if you spend all of your time, pretty close to Maria, and I think you stare at the knife a lot, and you walk around with a lot of low health, I think you get the in water ending where you drown yourself in your own car. Whereas if you just keep your distance away from Maria, the clone of your wife, or whatever you want to call her, manifestation, and you stay in fairly well health, or fairly good health through the course of the game, you get the Laura ending where you end up, you and the girl who was Marie's friend leave Silent Hill together in a happy little ending. So I think, I would actually like to have just some weight to your decisions versus, I mean, some things are going to be out of your control.
Obviously, yeah.
Just to progress from one episode to another. But I just wish there was a little bit more weight at the very end, where it wasn't, pick Kenny or pick the other gal on who you want to be.
Actually, you know what? It's in the case of season 2, I will defend the decision, because it's not just a case of like the ending of season 1, for example, The Walking Dead. It was kind of straightforward. There was like just 2 decisions: either you shoot Lee and to prevent him from turning into a walker, a zombie, or you just basically let him turn. And I guess the justification is whether or not you liked him as a character or the way you played it. I don't know. Mm-hmm. But in the case of season 2, for example, the choices you make at the end, it's not a case of you choose... Well, you do choose between 2 characters, but you choose between them because they both represent 2 conflicting ideologies.
Right.
And those 2 ideologies have been at the center as far as like one of the major themes of season 2 of The Walking Dead. And there's other choices, well, I think I've seen an argument where people argue like there's one moment in the game where a character, they've just given up, they don't even want to fight the fight, they just want to die, and they're almost like in a catatonic state because of something that happened before that, and you're given the option of either trying to save them or let them go, because, that's their decision. Mm-hmm. Because I've been with that character and I've tried to help them beforehand, but still they weren't responding in this case, I decided to leave them because from a storytelling perspective, it actually kind of neatly wrapped up that character's arc, if you know what I'm saying, because it's like, well, not everyone's going to survive. That was kind of like the major theme of season 2, which is why I personally describe it as less naive than season 1. Because season 1 of The Walking Dead, like, I'll try to explain this as concise and as best as I can. Like, season 1 of The Walking Dead is almost like, you could almost make a movie out of it, especially with the tear-jerking ending.
Right.
But season 2 of The Walking Dead is actually a movie, it's a sequel that Hollywood would never make, because it actually shows you what happens after the tear-jerking ending. And let's just say it's not all roses and peaches, so to say.
Right.
And the characters you interact with, they're not as just and they're not as fair as Lee was. And because of that, you kind of have to almost juggle all of these characters and the different tempers and ideologies and whatnot. And all of that culminates with the ending. Of season 2 of The Walking Dead, because one of the characters, and since we're going into spoiler territory, is
have been all along.
Well, yeah, but one of the characters is Kenny, who has survived the events of season 1 and season 2. But the guy is I'll try to keep it vague, but let's just say he's kind of not all there by the end. He is on the verge of basically turning into another character that we meet earlier in episode 2, who has become like this massive megalomaniacal tyrant. Don't you dare object to what I'm saying, etc., etc. Whereas the other character that you get to choose between, initially she joins your group in the middle of season 2, and initially she's kind of like a loner. You know, she doesn't really trust anyone in the beginning. She's self-reliant, you know. But over the course of the season, I was able to kind of like pull her towards my side, where it's like, look, I'm with you. It's survival of the fittest, but sometimes you gotta trust someone else. Sometimes you gotta have someone watch over your back. So in the end, the decision basically, it's not it's in the case of like Mass Effect. One of the criticism was that regardless of what choice you make, the cinematics are pretty much the same. But in the case of Season 2 of The Walking Dead, despite the fact that you could argue that it's a left, right, and center decision, depending on that decision, the potential story of Season 3...
could be vastly different, yes.
At least I'm hoping it could be vastly different, because again, like I said, you're choosing between like 3 different ideologies, and because of that, you get like 8 different versions of the ending.
Right.
So... in that respect, I think Telltale is kind of going in the right direction there. I'm not sure how they'll be able to pull off the beginning of Season 3 personally, or if Season 3 is going to continue the story of Clementine, or maybe that was the ending of Clementine's story, which I'd be personally fine with, because again, you're kind of choosing an ideology that you're going to stick with, and let's just say if that were the ending, I'd be satisfied with it personally.
And
but it also addresses, just to wrap this up, it also addresses one of the other solutions that you and I had, where it's like one of the ways that Telltale can make the endings have more impact is by keeping the stories more self-contained versus leaving cliffhangers for Season 2, Season 3, etc., etc.
Now, again, when you get to the end of Season 2 of The Walking Dead and you've, kind of wooed that one gal to your side, and, you kind of learn more about, Kenny and the way you interact with these characters, say like you were playing the entire game and you were on Kenny's side, being friendly with him and a little bit more hostile towards the gal towards the end, shouldn't that culminate into a set ending where you go with Kenny versus at the very end you gotta make that choice?
You can if you choose to. Well, if at the end you choose Kenny's side.
Well, that's just it. You end up choosing Kenny's side versus, again, it's like Mass Effect where you end up choosing left, right, or center. Versus letting your actions during the gameplay dictate which side you go to at the end.
I understand what you're saying, but again, my defense or my justification is that your decision is directly tied with the way you play the game. Not in the sense that the decision is made for you, but because you've been on Kenny's side, naturally you're gonna choose his side in this conflict as well.
Probably, but again, I just think it'd have more weight if you ended up. And of course, you're basically taking away the last choice. But if those choices you made during the entire game steer you in that direction, and that's just what happens, then you could say that, okay, well, if I replay the game now and I'm on her side, I'll get a different ending. Versus basically going, again, the Mass Effect 3 thing. You think everything's going to accumulate into a customized ending based on what you've done over the course of the thing, but then at the end you're given, door number 1, door number 2, or door number 3, and it's like, okay, so I could be a dick to Kenny the entire time, but I can still choose him at the last minute.
Right, what you're saying is that you'd rather like the choices kind of be more connected to one another, kind of string them together.
Yeah, so the choices kind of shape the ending. I mean, granted, it'd still be kind of the same type of ending as Walking Dead 2.
If you make that decision, yeah.
Except that the game makes a decision for you based on how much percentage or whatever you stayed with one person or the other. Say like you were with either Ken or her, then you could just take the baby and go by yourself, and that would be the ending.
Mm-hmm. But of course, again, as my last-ditch defense, in the real world, if you're with someone, but if they snap, that
is true.
You're not necessarily gonna if a friend of yours is going down the wrong path, and you try to be by his side, but all of a sudden, he's like, say, I don't know, drug addiction culminates with him killing someone. There's no guarantee you're gonna help him hide the evidence and get rid of the body. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, that is true. So when Kenny flips out, there's no guarantee that you're gonna stick with Kenny when he goes that crazy. Because what happens at the end is him really finally flipping out, and you either like slay the beast, or for whatever reason, I don't know why you would make this decision, but you choose to stick with him for whatever reason. Well, he just to justify it, and this is the quality of in-depth writing that Telltale is known for.
Yeah,
is you understand why Kenny's flipping out, because he thinks that the gal killed the baby.
Yeah. Plus all the previous losses he suffers through the 2 episodes.
Right. And that's the best thing about Telltale Games is their storytelling. I mean, even if they're a bad guy, you understand their angle. You can kind of say, if I was in that person's shoes, maybe I could see myself doing the same thing. So, I mean, definitely, though we might disagree on the way that they create their games, the way that they tell their stories is phenomenal, and I wouldn't change that for a bit. I just wish that the stories were a bit more shaped based on your choices versus having just the pick at the very end.
Which could still be done, because Telltale has recently announced that they're going to be working on a brand new IP, and according to the CEO of the company, this is going to be their most ambitious project yet. And
so by working on a new IP, do they mean they're going to be working on a pre-existing IP, or are they going to create their own?
Nope, they're going to create their own franchise or game or whatever.
This might be interesting because this is something I don't think they've done yet. Everything they've done so far has been pretty much, well, except for maybe Sam & Max, has been pretty much an existing property. Back to the Future, which was good in my opinion.
Monkey Island, Sam & Max, Walking Dead, Game of Thrones, etc., etc.
Jurassic Park.
Well, we don't talk about that one.
We don't talk about that one.
That's the deformed child of the family.
But I mean, I love their classic point-and-click games, and I also like their in-depth storytelling type of games. It's just kind of flabbergasts me that when I'm playing Game of Thrones and even Wolf Among Us, that too much is just not permanent, I guess.
Yeah, which kind of has to do with the fact that, like I said, people, they're almost like afraid of giving people a bad ending, or maybe they're afraid that's going to go like out of continuity with the pre-existing property, which is why I'm curious about this new IP they talk about, because if this is a story that they have total control over, there's not going to be that, you can't kill this character.
You got to tie this into the TV show or the movie.
Yeah.
Or the other game.
And because they said that this is going to be their most ambitious project yet, I'm wondering if they don't mean it as far as like providing variety and different pathways and whatnot that have more meaning than just, you temporarily take a left turn, but then you make another right turn and you're back on the highway.
Yeah.
So I guess we'll have to wait and see, but we've been palavering for nearly an hour here, and I think that's actually a compliment for Telltale.
Yeah, it is. And again, I mean, people might think that I'm shitting on Telltale. I'm not. I enjoy their games. I just wish that they had that little bit of extra weight that would send them over the top as far as absolutely masterpieces.
Like I told Ken, it's not me that you have to justify yourself to, it's the Lord. And by Lord, I mean Telltale. We'll see if they approve this video for monetization.
I was gonna say, do I have to like make a last minute choice? I could live a bad life during the entire span of my life, but I get one last chance to pick one or the other, and that totally justifies everything that I've done horrible in my life.
Well, not really, because in the next discussion, I'm still going to refer to you as an asshole, like in season 2 of The Walking Dead.
And you also have to paint me in that voice. Well, people are saying me. No, but people, we can. I guess if we're gonna leave with anything, is that we can have intelligent discussions and still remain friends on this type of shit. This isn't tribalism. I mean, this whole entire, oh, you're right, I'm wrong. That's total bullshit. I mean, talk things out for Christ's sakes. Oh, sorry, Telltale Games' sake.
Yeah. So if you have any take on the subject matter that we've been talking about for the past hour, feel free to chime in with your comments. And
if any of you guys comment saying, spoiler alert, go fuck yourself. We said that like 20 fucking times in the beginning. Spoiler alert, you just ruined the game for me. It's like, we told you, these games were going to ruin.
This discussion is going to ruin the games, yeah.
Well, whatever.
Yeah, but you know what, if you're not listening, here's a spoiler, you die at the end of episode 1 of Game of Thrones.
Yep, Knife in the Throat by Ramsay Snow. No matter what you do, no matter what you say, what you do, it won't matter. All men die, whatever the Morgu Valas, or whatever the hell it is.
Valar Morghulis.
That's it. See, I'm not on the level of geekdom that Cinemax is, so sorry. Ooh.
Well, I didn't buy the Deadpool game day one, did I?
Touche.